From an early age, we are conditioned to look out before looking inside. The child who receives a smile for obeying unconsciously understands that his acceptance is linked to performance. The good grade yields affection. The proper behavior receives clapping. Over time, we grew up without realizing that we were taught to seek the approval of others as a reflection of our self-esteem. But what happens when we live stuck to the expectation of others? We start to shape our choices, our appearance, even our values according to what others expect from us, even if these people are strange, distant, or irrelevant. It is the invisible trap of external validation. The more we need it, the more we move away from who we really are. We live in a theater. We use masks to please. And the stage is collective: social networks, work environments, family dinners. Each scenario requires a character, and if we are not attentive, we forget the actor behind the paper. Nietzsche said that becoming what one is requires courage. And perhaps this is the greatest silent cowardice of our time, to give up our authenticity to be accepted by people who do not even know who we are real. The question is, how long will you postpone your freedom in the name of the opinion of others? We live as if we were emotional thermometers of the opinions of others. A compliment exalts us. A criticism drops us. Subtle, we become dependent on the emotional oscillation of those who observe us. Happiness becomes conditional. I am good if they say I am. But what if they don't say? What if they laugh, criticize, reject? Then we collapsed, because we place our identity in the eyes of the other. Social networks amplify this logic. Likes, comments, likes. Everything seems like a public vote on our value. Aesthetics is worth more than content. Acceptance is worth more than the truth. And the fear of rejection becomes silence. We stop acting for fear of judgment. We stop talking for fear of cancellation. We stop being for fear of not being loved. But the truth is brutal. You can be admired by everyone and yet feel miserable if admiration is for something you are not. Peace is not to be accepted by all. Peace is to be faithful to yourself, even when it makes you be rejected by many. And this faithfulness requires a radical decision, living a life that is true, not comfortable, not approved, but true. Few have the courage to be unpopular, and, paradoxically, this is one of the greatest freedoms a human being can achieve. Most live up to the need to please, and do not realize the weight of these currents. Dress for others. They say what they think others want to hear. Choose careers, relationships, and lifestyles to avoid crooked looks. They live edited lives, but in the silence of the night, they feel something is wrong. The courage to be despised is the gateway to a more authentic existence. It is not about seeking rejection, but to stop doing it. When we fail to shape each gesture to gain approval, we start for the first time to act from an inner center, living with root. Big names in history were despised in their time and revered later, not because they followed the applause, but because they had the boldness to challenge expectations. They understood that the value of an action is not in immediate acceptance, but in coherence with a deeper truth. To be unpleasant, sometimes to be honest. It's saying no when everyone says yes. It is keeping standing when the world kneels. And this is not childish rebellion. It is spiritual maturity. Inner freedom begins when you no longer need to be understood, accepted, or validated to move on. If the fear of rejection dominates us, freedom will never be complete. Therefore, ancient philosophers practiced something that modern society despises: voluntary exposure to ridicule. It looks strange at first glance. Why would anyone put themselves purposely in embarrassing situations? But this practice, adopted by Stoic ones like Cato and cynical as Diogenes, was a kind of mental gymnastics, a workout to support contempt and learn to stay whole even under hostile looks. Cato, for example, was weirdly wearing in public to feel ashamed of only what was, in fact, shameful. Diogenes walked against the crowd in theaters, not for free provocation, but to remember that the world often walks in the wrong direction. These gestures do not seek attention, sought inner solidity. The more we face the discomfort of Disapproval. The more we become able to distinguish between what is socially ridiculous and what is morally necessary. This philosophical practice teaches us that the world does not collapse when we laugh at ourselves, and that true dignity does not come from prestige, but from the peace of who knows who it is. Not all contempt we receive is fair. By the way, he is often not even us. It is a projection. Carl Jung called shadow all that we repress, desires, insecurities, fears, traces we do. Not accept in ourselves, but what is repressed does not disappear. He hides and instead of being recognized, is thrown into the other. When someone judges with intensity, when a criticism seems exaggerated, cruel, or obsessive, perhaps it is just exposing something that cannot stand to see in itself. In other words, the more someone gets annoyed by you, the greater the chance that you are reflecting a part of the soul that this person tries to deny. Understanding this takes us out of the place of victim and keeps us from taking everything to the personal side. Not every judgment is an analysis of its character. Sometimes it is just a misplaced mirror of the soul of others. Knowing this is not arrogance, it is maturity. It is understanding that in many cases, the problem is not who we are, but what we represent for others. In the history of philosophy, many of the great thinkers not only tolerate contempt, they sought it, not for masochism or exhibitionism, but as a form of training, an exercise to break free from the vice of approval. Stoic Cato, for example, made a point of dressing old, fashionably, just to get used to being ridiculed. Diogenes, the cynical, challenged social conventions in a deliberate way, walked back in the theaters, slept in barrels, spoke uncomfortable truths in the public square. It was not an empty provocateur. He was a free man who did not ask for permission to exist. This practice has a powerful logic, as we voluntarily expose ourselves to the discomfort of rejection, we lose the paralyzing fear of not being accepted. It's like having an emotional vaccine against the need to please. This is why the wise men train contempt, not because they seek it, but because they do not fear it. And when the contempt of others no longer threatens us, we are finally free to live according to our own conscience. There is a very rare kind of courage, one that does not appear in the headlines, is not celebrated with trophies. It is the courage to be despised, not to be loved, not to be understood, to carry the weight of social disapproval on their shoulders, and yet follow firm, faithful to oneself. It is not a courage that is born of the heroic impulse, but from a silent maturity, cultivated with pain, loss, and deep reflection. And it is perhaps the most liberating of all. In ancient philosophy, this courage was more than a virtue. It was a training, a daily practice. Cato, Stoic, deliberately wore badly, out of fashion of his day, not for futile rebellion, but as an exercise to support the judgment. He knew that as long as he depended on the look of others, he would never be free. Its purpose was simple and revolutionary. Get used to feeling ashamed only of what is really shameful. Diogenes was even more radical. He provoked society with symbolic gestures. He slept in a barrel, urinated in public, spoke to kings as if they were ordinary men, and it was. Alexander the Great, after finding him, said, "If I were not Alexander, I would like to be Diogenes." Why? Because there was a man who owed nothing to anyone. That did not shape expectations. A man invulnerable to adulation and rejection. This courage to be despised is not, as many think, arrogance. It is self-knowledge. It is knowing that living based on the approval of others is a golden prison. It is understanding that public admiration is volatile, unpredictable, and often superficial. It is to realize that, behind most criticism, there is more projection than truth, more insecurity in the other than failed in itself. And what happens when someone breaks free from it? He stops adjusting, stops silencing, stops asking permission to be who it is, and it begins to live in depth, with wholeness, with truth. But let's be honest, this courage has a cost. Living authentically often means walking against the group. It means being the target of judgments, malicious comments, subtle exclusions. It means enduring crooked looks and criticism, disguised as advice. So few choose it. Most prefers the safe route of compliance. Adapt, hide, adopt masks so as not to be rejected. But the price of this is very high, the loss of its own essence. And to live without essence is to survive on the outside and die inside. True courage is not shouting on stage. It is staying silent when everyone requires a character. It is being yourself when everyone expects you to be one more. As Nietzsche said, "He who wants to learn to walk must first learn to fall." And those who want to learn to be free need to learn to be despised without hating themselves for it. The rejection of the world does not define who you are. The way you respond to her, yes. There is something deeply revealing and disturbing to realize that what we most hate in others can actually be a hidden reflection of ourselves. Carl Jung called this projection phenomenon, and understanding this psychological mechanism is a decisive step to break free from the weight of the opinion of others. When someone judges us hardly, ridicules us, or seems bothered by our presence, it is not always about us. It is often about something within the person herself that she doesn't have the courage to face. A fear, anger, a repressed frustration, parts denied of themselves that are designed in the other as a form of unconscious relief. It is as if each one carries an invisible mirror, and in this mirror we see the others, but with the features we hide in us. When we hated someone's ego, we may be fighting ours. When we feel envious of others' freedom, we may be chained in our own lives. When we criticize someone's boldness, we may be suffocated by our cowardice. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us in others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That is, the opinions and reactions of the people around us say more about them than about us, but they also reveal a lot about who we are if we know how to observe without reactivity." And that goes for both sides. When we feel attacked, rejected, diminished, our pain may not only come from the other's criticism, but the way it resonates within us. Sometimes the opinion that hurts us most is not the one that confronts us, but that confirms a judgment we already do in silence about ourselves. This is why the way to emotional freedom is through self-knowledge. When you know who you are, with all your flaws and virtues, the attacks lose strength. The compliments too. You start to better filter the words you receive. The difference between offense and opinion becomes a clear line, and even when it hurts, you know you don't have to answer everything or convince anyone. This understanding changes our relationship with the world. We become less susceptible to the tides of applause and disapproval, and paradoxically, more empathic as well. Because when we see someone hurting us with words or looks, we learn to ask, what hurts inside it? By seeing the projection, we take a step out of the social game of validation, and we started playing another game, that of consciousness, a more lonely but infinitely more true game. After all, living to please is living to be a reflection of the other, but living with consciousness is learning to be a mirror of yourself. We live in a culture addicted to approval. Likes, followers, applause, all this feeds an invisible reward system that conditions us to seek acceptance all the time. And the problem is not only in the emotional dependence it generates, but the silent price we pay for trying to always be pleasant. The truth is that pleasing everyone is the fastest way to get lost, because when trying to avoid all kinds of confrontation, we become too malleable, shaping our words, actions, and even thoughts to fit in the mold of what is socially well viewed. Gradually, we are no longer authentic to be acceptable. Nietzsche said, "What does not cause discussions either causes revolutions." This does not mean living in conflict, but accepting that if you have something genuine to say, it is inevitable that you dislike someone. And that's fine. The discomfort we cause in others because we are who we are is a natural filter. Separates those who connect with the truth of those who only want convenience. But why are we so afraid of being unpleasant? Because we learn from an early age that approval means belonging, and rejection means exclusion. And deep down, we fear being set aside, forgotten, discredited. However, the price of living due to pleasing is self, abandoning itself. The courage to be unpleasant is not about becoming rude or insensitive. It is about being faithful to their own values, even if it generates discomfort. It's about learning to say no without guilt. It is about prioritizing the truth about diplomacy, when necessary. Cato, the Roman Stoic, deliberately dressed old-fashionedly to train his contempt for the opinion of others. Diogenes, the cynical, walked back in theaters, not for free provocation, but to remember himself that the judgment of the majority does not always have value. They knew that by voluntarily exposing themselves to ridicule, they became freer inside. Today, any act of deep authenticity can be seen as an affront. Defend unpopular ideas, make out of the standard life choices, take on strangers, follow an unusual professional path. All can attract crooked looks. But each judgment we endured without retreating is a silent victory against the dictatorship of validation. And there is a power in this. When we cease to be unpleasant, we release ourselves from the emotional arrest of "and if." We talk more clearly, act more firmly, live more lightly, because the weight of the social mask is replaced by the lightness of being whole. It is not about seeking contempt, but not to fear it, not to allow him to prevent us from living with truth. This is the courage that separates those who live on the stage of the lives of those who only interpret roles. Living for oneself in a world that constantly requires masks is one of the greatest acts of courage in modern life. It is choosing the truth, even if it hurts. It is to support its essence, even if it bothers you. And above all, it is understanding that the only approval that really matters, it's yours. You don't have to be the edited version of yourself to deserve respect. You just need to be whole. Now it tells me, how many times have you molded to fit in places that weren't yours? How many times have you swallowed your truth just to avoid discomfort? Comment down here. When was the last time you chose yourself, even though you risked displeasing? And if this video made sense to you, share with those who need to hear this and subscribe to the channel so as not to lose the next debates. We see each other in the next video, real, freer, and less hostage to the opinion of others.